that Butler has. And
Mark, where do you live?
I live in Greensboro, North Carolina. I moved down here. Yeah, I moved down here, right, actually right by the Coliseum. Or
nice.
Whatever the hell it's named now. Yeah, I moved down here in 2010. I was in the city and was tired of living in Queens and Manhattan, and then it's too expensive. So moved down here, got a job, and been here ever since. Now, because of what I do, I miss Connecticut because I don't get to come up as much. But going to a couple games here in the next few weeks, so excited to come up.
Excellent.
All right. And here we go. Hello, and welcome to Husky Hoops. I am your host, for now, the best podcast host in the universe, Steve Cully. Coach Schuman is currently finishing another podcast, so you're in for a great treat because I'm in charge now. And when I'm in charge, things get fun. And with me, as always, my co-host and cohort, the voice of the Huskies, the icon, the best of the best himself, Joe D'Ambrosio, and my fact checker. Joe?
Good morning, Steve. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning.
And a very special guest, the host of the Locked On podcast, Mr. Mark. How do you say your last name?
Zanetto.
Zanetto. I'm very bad with pronunciations for being
how
the
else
best.
did you pronounce that?
I get ripped all the time for pronouncing names wrong, so don't feel bad.
I thought it was Zanetto, so I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to screw it up because if I do, then Joe will let me know about it. So we had a big week for Husky Hoops, especially with the men on the men's side. And Joe, you had predicted correctly about Creighton for sure. They absolutely struggled against them. The women got back on track, and they had a boost from the girl. Was it Aubrey who was injured, who came back?
Yep.
Yeah. It was nice to see her get some minutes and get back in the lineup. And, she still said that she has
381 days since her last appearance.
381 days.
So
wow.
Good for her.
I wonder what I was doing 381 days ago. That's impressive. No, it's good for her. It's a big boost for them. But the game that everyone was talking about, obviously, was Creighton. And Joe, you had said all along that Creighton was going to be their biggest competition and a problem in the Big East. Otherwise, they may have a problem with St. John's, but Creighton was the one that you said was the team to beat. And they did. It was a close showing, but a little underwhelming. What were your thoughts on that game? Caravan, solo ball. Yeah.
Well,
Stewart
I think you had too many guys who didn't play. You had too many guys who didn't play well, and I thought at some point the loss of McNeely would really come back and bite them. And I
You
think
did,
that
yes.
was the game. I think last night too, but they managed to put, Caravan had a much better game. He was off. He didn't play well against Creighton. The guys in the middle, Terrace Reed was a no-show. Again, and I'm not trying to bash the kid, but I think we've seen who Aiden Mahaney is. He's a guy you can play 3-4 minutes at a time, and if you get something from him, fine. If not, you get him out of the game. I mean, and really, Jaden Ross kind of like that too. They play. Danny plays him for his defense, and his defense is still improving, shall we say? But the Creighton better stuff's going to happen.
Yeah,
stuff is going to happen. What are you going to do? I mean, even though the league, and I don't know what Mark's thoughts are on this, but the league is mediocre at best.
Right.
They'll be lucky to get 4 teams in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
And that all depends on how St. John's does. I think Marquette, Creighton, and UConn are solid. I think St. John's a maybe. And I think everybody else better win the conference tournament in New York to get there.
Yeah.
And Creighton, here's the other thing. Creighton traditionally plays UConn tough. It's 8-2 against UConn. When you've played 10 games, that's a trend.
Joe, the thing that shocked me about the game, though, in particular, was UConn playing Creighton in Creighton in Omaha is almost like a guaranteed loss, right? They've never won there. If you look at Creighton's splits before the game, they were 1-6 coming into this game on the road in neutral site games. So that team in particular, I was more shocked that they struggled as badly as they did because of that. And because of the fact that they did get off, seeing a trend more of this team, and it happened last night too, where you get off to a big start and then you allow the team to kind of get loose and you don't really step on their neck. This team does not have the alphas, the killers that they had the last couple of years. Right. And whether it's Aiden, whether it's, Haas, who's doing a fantastic job this year, kind of upping his game, but he's not Tristan Newton. He's a 6'2", 6'1", generously listed probably version of what we had last year, which was 6'5", 6'6" at point guard, NBA talent. Haas is a G League European type level talent. That's no disrespect. He could probably spend the next 10 years of his life making really good money playing professional basketball, but he's not Steph Castle, and he's not Cam Spencer, and he's not Tristan Newton. And I think I rarely ever give Dan any grief because I feel like they have earned the respect of commentators and media alike that you should at least kind of let it play out. But I think you're right, Joe. I think Aiden, I don't think Dan did him any favors by kind of saying he would be somewhere in the middle of Tristan and Cam. So the expectations of the fans is now like, well, where is this guy? And it was a miscalculation. It was a miscalculation on how you play him. He was never a point guard at St. Mary's. He was a 2 guard in a very, very slow, intricate offense. But St. Mary's didn't have an issue with him at 6'3" as a shooting guard because in the WCC, you're not facing guys who are 6'6" at the shooting guard. So his 13.9 points per game at St. Mary's looks great, but it just doesn't translate to the Big East. You can use him in spurts if you play him off the ball, but that's not what this team needs right now. They have Solo.
Right. No. And the other thing too, Mark, and I totally agree with you on your thoughts on Mahaney, because that's what I've said all along. He came in and people thought he was going to be a point, and I said, "There's no shot in hell this kid's going to be a point guard." I mean, watching him play a couple times with St. Mary's, that just wasn't his game. And here's the other thing, and I'm just going to throw it out there now. And I agree with you. I think Hurley has earned the right to do things and maybe make a mistake here and there. But I think the three-peat thing from the beginning of the year put incredible pressure on these kids.
Sure.
And this was a totally different cast. If you get to the middle of the season and you're 16-2, 15-3, and you're blowing people away, then you can say, hey, we've got a chance to do something that nobody's ever done. But I think the pressure and I think they feel it. I think they feel the pressure of this idea to be historic. And as of right now, they're a 5 or 6 seed in the NCAA.
Oh yeah, there's 6 right now.
Things can change, right? There's plenty of time, but this idea that they're going to get a cakewalk of Providence to Newark to the Final Four, that's not. I don't see him as a 6 seed going to Newark and making some 3 seed have to play him in what's a UConn home game.
Right.
I just don't see that happening right now. So
what I could see happening, Joe, is, we said this we did a live reaction show last night. I got a little heated last night. I won't, if you go and watch it over again, I might have been a little upset at some.
You
some
can get heated on here.
No,
it's
but
okay.
what bothered me is, and we can all talk very constructively about how good this team is, or the expectations were too high, right? And that was a lot because of what Dan put on them, right? So you can definitely fault him for that. However, if we're talking, and I'm not saying Cooper Flagg is the same as Liam McNeely, but if you take Cooper Flagg off Duke right now, how bad do they drop? I think they lose 4 of 5 down the stretch.
Oh,
in
absolutely.
a very mediocre ACC. So Liam McNeely, who is probably the second most impactful freshman in the country in terms of what he provides his team, is not playing. So when he's not available, you lose not only your best offensive player, but statistically, I know Haas is their best on-ball defender, but statistically, overall, he's their best defender when it comes to like the metrics, like the advanced metrics that show he's more impactful on the defensive side than someone like Alex Caravan. So now Alex is having to guard the guys like Telfair and Pierre Brooks last night, and Jemiah Neal against Creighton, like all those guys who went off. And if you have Liam in there, it's just another guy that you don't have to worry about getting more fouls and getting into trouble. So if this team can hold water for the next game or two, and Liam comes back for the DePaul game and then the tough stretch on the back end of the Big East, I don't think anyone's going to want to play them down the stretch, because if they get hot and they go into the NCAA tournament as one of the hotter teams, whether it's Providence, whether it's in the South region, whether they ship them out west, who's going to want to play the 2-time national champion with Dan Hurley and his record in the NCAA tournament now, with guys who are feeling pretty good about themselves and a healthy roster?
I totally agree with you on McNeely. I think that, as I said at the beginning, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that they could get by some teams without him, but eventually the wear and tear is gonna wear on them. And the one kid, and Cully knows this because I've talked him up a lot, I want to see play is Stewart. I think
he had a good game.
Last night, Hurley was ready to kill him because of his defense. Absolutely.
On that one possession, right? Where he went to help.
Well, he got Caravan off the bench, and then he kept Stewart in because Stewart made a shot or something like that.
Right, exactly.
I think Stewart's development will help them when McNeely gets back, because it'll add to their depth. I mean, right now, when you look at them, they go maybe quality, they go 7 deep. They go the 5 starters. And the other kid who I'd like to see play a little bit more, but we only see him in short spurts because obviously the coaches don't think he's ready for longer periods, is Ahmad Noel.
Right.
He would be my backup point guard. I would not play Mahaney as a point guard unless people are in the depths of foul trouble. So, if you get one more guy into that rotation once McNeely comes back, then I think you'll be fine as long as you stay away from injuries. And the Creighton game, to put a bow on that, guys, it's just, I think it comes under the category of shit happens. Stuff happens against a team that has had more success against you since you came back to the Big East than all the other teams combined.
Right.
But Dave,
especially the last 2.5 years.
Joe, your guy there, Jalen Stewart, had a pretty good game, and you had been talking about him all year. And it was good to see him step up and play and do pretty well, because he had not done much, and he got a chance now since McNeely's been out starting. He produced. He got some production, which I think.
But the problem is, Steve and Mark, he played well Saturday. He was average, if not below average, yesterday. It's the consistency.
Consistency
that you're looking for. Caravan, I think, has had more off games this year than we would have expected, right?
Oh,
But
yeah.
Can I ask you about that, Joe? Let me ask you
Yeah.
about this because I talked about this and I want to address the Ahmad Noel stuff because I actually asked Dan about it in media availability when he was on the road before the which game was it? Before the I forget which one. It's about 2 weeks ago before they went on the road, and he basically just said with Ahmad Noel they love him. They think he works hard in practice. They think he's going to have a great career, but he's like when he gets minutes, he's got to like show us something.
right, exactly.
Give us like that wow moment where we're like, oh, we can't keep this kid off the floor. And right now he's just kind of like steadying it down and went and he had some nice moments. It was against it was before Georgetown. Sorry. So and then the Georgetown game, I actually joked around on social media. I said, everybody that wants to see Ahmad Noel play, you can thank me because I asked Dan the last question and said, hey, what about Ahmad Noel? All of the fans are asking me about why doesn't he play? And then he said, yeah, he's like, we're going to look to give him some more minutes if X, Y, and Z happens. So he played 7 minutes against Georgetown, had 4 points. But it's the same thing about Stort. The consistency level with him, with all these guys that are developing just aren't there. But the question I wanted to ask you, Joe, about Alex, I love Alex. The only apparel that I've ever bought in terms of like this new version of UConn, not the Ray Allens and the Kemba Walkers, is I have an Alex Caravan branded sweatshirt that I wear, right? Because to me, he's kind of the heart and soul. He really is
no question
what Dan Hurley basketball is all about. But I will say this, and this isn't a derogatory comment to him. He was never going to be a number one option. I think that's also part of the same thing that happened with Aiden Mahaney, where Dan was talking about where he needs to be and those expectations. Like Alex is a fantastic, like one of the best role players to ever play college basketball.
Yes.
And if he's on a team that has a Liam McNeely, a Steph Castle, Donovan Clingan, so on and so forth, he's going to be that much more impactful because who has a fourth or fifth option that can do the things that he does? But now you're taking the step up to be a 2 or a 1 first option, especially now with Liam out. Alex doesn't have the game to just get you a bucket. Like he's got to be in pick and roll action. He's got to be in middle ball screens. He's got to be coming across the lane, maybe posting up. But that's not what UConn does. That's not what they run. So it's hard for me to be critical of him in the respect of if the offense isn't running smoothly through him, then he's not going to look good.
Right. I totally agree. He made a move last night in the second half. You might remember it, where he was on the wing and he took the ball hard to the hole and hit a layup. And I'm sitting there thinking, I want to see more of this from him.
Sure.
I want to see him take the ball to the hoop. And look, we can talk, and I'm sure we will, about the foul discrepancy and all of that stuff. But I want to see him take the ball more to the hoop. The other thing, since we're into generalities here, is I love Diarra's gumption. I love his aggressiveness. But the ball sticks to his hand too much. The ball sticks to his hand way too much, especially when the shot clock's winding down.
Yeah.
And there's times when the shot clock's winding down that he gives the ball to Samson Johnson 20 feet from the hoop, where he's not going to do it, where Samson Johnson's totally useless.
Right.
Totally useless in that situation. So my thought would be give him the ball. I thought this was happening last night in the game. And I went back and checked it this morning. How many field goals do you think Solo Ball had in the last 12 minutes and 15 seconds?
I'm going to say 1 or 2.
1.
Yeah.
358 of vote. He didn't score in the last 12-15, or the last 7-15 of regulation. He didn't even take a shot. How does that happen? He was great. He has developed into a terrific offensive player. I mean, as smooth a stroke as we've seen on a three-point shooter from UConn, maybe since Ray or Rip, right? Just from the aspect of having a smooth stroke.
The offense has got to go to him. It's got to go to him. The last 2 games, you could see the difference in his ability. He has a tremendously higher level ceiling than anybody else after seeing the last 2 games. It's just apparent. And the point you were talking about with Caravan, and I thought in this, I didn't watch the last game as much, but in the game before, I thought Caravan, from a creation standpoint, has to use more of his physicality than his quickness. He's not super quick. So, for him to be able to create is a much more difficult process. I agree with Mark. And Mark, it's nice to meet you, by the way.
You too,
it's a situation where he has to be able to, you're right, come off screens, be able to get an opportunity from that standpoint, or use his body in a one-on-one matchup. Because when he tries to explode off the ball, he doesn't get any separation. He doesn't get that kind of separation. Where Ball is explosive, can shoot from any. I mean, from what just the last 2 games, from what I've seen, has really evolved to where he can shoot from anywhere. He can score from anywhere. I mean, he comes around off the zoom play and he shoots right in the lane, drills it. I mean, with the handoff play where he comes around, and he can go to the basket if he needs to as well. But he knows the separation of space, like. He has that feel for when to shoot, when he has, or when to continue on. And I think Caravan, maybe, it's just his style of game. He could score, but you've got to run set stuff for him, I think, to get him on a regular basis, or he's got to get better at understanding when he's in one-on-one matchups, how to utilize his body to get to the basket, because he is strong. He is strong and he is physical. But sometimes he tries to cross over and out-quick a guy. He's just not doing it. It's not going to happen.
And he doesn't get to the free throw line a lot.
I disagree with you in one point, Stu.
Yeah.
I disagree with you.
Ahead, Joe.
He's got a decent, for a guy his size, he's got a decent first step. And that was what the play that I was talking about last night, when he kind of surprised his defender going to the right and hit that layup or that bank shot. I forget exactly what it is. So his first step's not awful, but I agree. He's, against some of these Big East forwards who he's matched up against, he can get into the lane. He's got that little floater that he runs. He could learn a jump hook a little bit, to use his and look, he's
big. He's big.
He's basketball savvy. So he's gonna figure out a way.
Yeah, I was gonna say to your point, Joe, about Solo. Listen, I love Solo ball, and if he's gonna have games like that where he scores 23 points, you kind of can excuse some of the defensive liability, because when I was tracking the game last night, the first 6 possessions of the game, Solo had 5 points, but he gave up 6 points. So it was kind of like he giveth and he taketh away, right? But if you're going to get that type of volume from him, then you live with it, because during the course of the game, you can sub him out, do offense defense situations. But all I was going to say is I think the reason why he doesn't get the type of volume that he probably should is because, and this is no disrespect to Haas, I think he's done a great job as a point guard. But to Joe's point, the ball does stick with Haas more than it stuck with Tristan or other even Andre Jackson when he was running point for us a couple years ago. The issue that I have is when they recruited guys or even went into the portal, when you bring in a guy like Aiden who can't run the point and kind of break guys down and take tough last second shots at the clock, now you're settling that Haas is that guy, right? So we didn't really care about this as much the last couple of years when Tristan Newton bailed you out with long 3-pointers like he did in the Kansas game last year and others like that, where when stuff's not working on offense, you have that one guy that can go get you a bucket. You had Steph last year, who, if he wanted to, he could probably average 25 points a game. He didn't need to, right? So that we had like 3 or 4 guys that could do that last year. We don't have that this year.
So against Creighton, he took 11 field goal attempts.
Yep,
made 6. Last night, he only took 14 in a 45-minute game that he played 41 minutes. That
he should get more shots.
That's gotta. Now, and the other thing, guys, is now when McNeely comes back, that's going to take even more shots away. Because
but you know what it'll do though is it's going to take some of the pressure off Haas, because if you saw what they were doing with Liam, is they were putting him in some like point forward positions where he was able to dictate the offense.
Good point. That's a very good point.
I think that helps Solo because he's going to get more open looks, and then you're going to get more open looks for Alex. And I wasn't the best basketball player in the world, but I was a really good shooter. Like I feel like the same, like when you're not as, fleet of foot as we were talking about a second ago, when you make one deep three, if they get up in your face, your first step, you can go buy someone and then make something happen because they're protecting against, someone making, a longer three, especially in today's game. So Alex has to play that cat and mouse game. And to Coach's point, I do think if you put him in middle ball screen, he does need to keep guys on his hip like that and kind of work on that little keep shooting those floaters. I mean, Alex is way too good a basketball player to be mired in a slump for much longer than he's going to be because he played well last night.
Yes,
it's only going to continue.
He came out hot, played well. I totally agree. I think again, once they get McNeely back and once he gets back into the rotation of things, then you've got Haas, you've got Caravan, you've got Ball, you've got McNeely, and you got the two-headed monsters. And last night you had 28 and I think 12 for them, which is terrific. Let me ask you this, Mark. I raised this point at halftime last night to a couple of the members of the Fourth Estate. Is it time for Reed to start and bring Johnson off the bench? Because I think the way Johnson plays gives you a bigger spark off the bench than Reed does. And they combined for 40 minutes, so they're gonna split time, and a lot of it is dependent on who's in foul trouble and who's not.
Yeah, I think this, Joe, because you've been covering this team for a long time. That Dan is fiercely loyal to his players, and it may be time, but I don't think it's going to happen. Let's just
I totally agree.
You know what I mean? Like, I think if for us, like who are the armchair quarterbacks or whatever you want to call us, like I think for sure it wouldn't be a bad decision. But I also think what Sampson brings is he has it's like when he talked about Solo and his defense, that he has the best intentions, that he's not like this guy who's like, just I'm a bucket and I don't care about defense. Like Sampson wants to be great. You can just tell, you can tell about his attitude, the way he goes about things. This kid is not a quitter. So he's trying his ass off to really kind of be the player that Dan wants him to be. And sometimes he like you said, Joe, I think some of the expectations have gotten to some of the players. And I think that's part of Sampson's kind of like up and down play. He still is top 3 or 4 in the country in field goal percentage because he just gets to the rim so well. Yeah. His free throw shooting has improved. He's a 73% free throw shooter this year. I never thought I'd see that, which is amazing. He made 2 clutch free throws last night. So I don't know. I think they're just different players. And I think he wants to be loyal to Sam. And he knows that Terrace is coming back.
I could see that. I
think he knows Terrace is coming back too. Like, so I think that's it's kind of like, like how it used to be where you earned your spot, like as time goes on. And I know we're all a bunch of old guys here, I'm in my mid 40s. So like, back in the day, you would come in and you were a freshman and you earned your spot. And when you were a junior, you played. So I think Terrace is going to earn that starting spot. And he had a great game when he started against Gonzaga at 20 and 13. So it's definitely an option for Dan. But I don't think he's going to do it.
No, he uses 2 guys too. He always uses two centers anyway. Oh, I had Maria. Oh, there's Maria. Good. He always uses 2 centers anyway, and utilizing the 2 centers, it's just how he's got to craft that time. I mean, even if he's starting Sampson, he can craft the time to be able to utilize Reed more. So does Diarra, is he going to move to the 2 once, or is he going to stay at the 1 when McNeely comes back?
Well, I think as Mark said, McNeely can play some point forward, but Diarra is the point guard. Diarra is the guy who's going to run the show. I think there'll be sets when McNeely will have the ball in his hands running the offense. And I think, to be honest with you, I think the ball flows a lot more when that's the case than with Diarra. Diarra's got a lot of what Maria Conlon had at Derby High, never passing the ball.
Well, he's
Seymour. I'm sorry. I get those valley schools are all one and alike to me. living up in Hartford.
I hold the all-time school record for assists there.
That's only because you had good teammates, sweetheart.
And they have a sign there, home of Maria Conlon, just so you know. I've seen it several times. Maria, what were your thoughts on the loss to Creighton for the men?
I wasn't surprised. Remember last week I said that was going to be a tough one for them?
You did, yes. And just said Mark had said they're 1-6 against them.
The nod I gave them was because they were playing at home, but
right, same.
You know, I thought that would be a tough one for them, especially if Creighton got hot and the big guy played well, which both things kind of happened. So, and then I didn't think they looked great yet last night either. I don't know.
Maria, can I ask you a question? Nice to meet you, by the way.
Of course. Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you? In the Creighton game, you could tell, like, I don't know, I watched it at home, so I'm listening to, the Fox feed, and they showed a huddle of Dan where he basically just called them soft and was just like, you let Jemiah Neal get off. Like, and essentially, I thought that's the pattern right now, because it happened with Butler last night too, where they start off well. The intentions are there. You're a coach, like, you love to see that, the fire, your team's playing great defense, like all of that. And then all of a sudden, from a coach's perspective, like, what happens? Like that, it's just like it's almost like the neurons stop firing and they lose defensive assignments. They don't close out. They foul unnecessarily. All of that started to happen in the Creighton game, and I've said that, like, it's almost an epidemic this year for anybody that UConn plays. They play their best game. Someone random plays their best game against them. They had two bench guys give them 35 points when they averaged like 15, and on the road. Same thing happened with the Xavier game, even though they won that game. So,
well, it's the Super Bowl, right? Everyone, when they play UConn,
but that's also partly because they're playing horrible defense. Like, do you think that kind of almost like that lackadaisical allows a team to essentially go, okay,
absolutely,
this team doesn't really, get in our face, 100%. And it helps them get off faster.
Mark, am I answering the question or Steve? It sounds like
I don't know. I thought I was asking you.
Steve's answering it though. Steve's answering.
I'm answering, and I'm not smoking, so that's 2 for 2.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, whenever anybody's playing UConn right now, right? Like that's the one you got highlighted on your schedule. So I think what we're going to continue to see, just like the women do all the time, is every team come out and try to play lights out. I do think that, in years past, I just still with Reed and Sampson, and I know we've talked about, like, they're a great 1-2 punch. They just aren't clinging. There's just not the same type of presence in there.
Oh, yeah.
Both from a communication level and just what they're doing around the rim. I just feel like guys are getting to the rim. I think we saw again last night some foul trouble with those guys, which isn't helpful, right? So I think that the thing that concerns me the most about watching them, and I think I said this like 2 weeks ago to Joe, is like they don't have the ability yet. Like, you get up 15, right? And like turn that to 30.
Right.
And instead, like, they go up into the half, like up 6 or 7, I think. I forget what the actual number was.
It was 8, but yeah, something like that.
Yeah, like they let them cut it in half instead of them, doubling that. And I think that, that's just been a struggle for them all year long. I think that's the most common thing we've seen from them, is their ability to, like, put the nail in the coffin and then, like, add 6 or 7 other nails. Hopefully when McNeely gets back, I think he has, like, that competitiveness and that fire that he brings every game, where I think we'll see a little bit more than that. But I do agree. I don't think this is one of the best defensive UConn teams we've seen in the last, I don't know, and definitely in the last 3 or 4 years. They still aren't scoring a ton of points either. Like, Joe, like, I watch these games and I'm like,
the Georgetown game,
like, we're struggling to hit like 70 every game. Like, and we're hitting 70, 72 in overtime,
That's partly because of their tempo.
Point. And, as far as the defense, Maria, I just think they don't move their feet enough. I think they play too much with their hands.
I agree.
And look, I'm going to talk about the elephant in the room now. And Mark, I know you've talked about this, is the discrepancy in free throws. Well, the opponents have taken 100 more free throws than UConn overall, and they've taken 67 in conference games. Now, people can whine about the officiating in the Big East, and that's justified because it's not. Yes, I was thinking of you. It's not very good. But I think the defensive, I think they just don't play with their feet. And I'll be honest with you, and I like Danny a lot. I think he's done an unbelievable job here. But I think the constant carping at the officials has an effect. I just think that they don't get the benefit of a whistle because of his histrionics on the sidelines. And that's who he is. And that's what's made him who he is. But I think you got to factor that into the discrepancy in the whistles. I just do. I think officials are human beings. And, if you're, I'm just going to throw a name out here. If you're Jeff Anderson and you're watching the way the game is officiated and you're seeing all that stuff, then I think it's going to play. Do I think it's right? No. Do I think it's happening? Yes. I just think, but it's not going to change because Dan's not going to change.
But no. I would also throw this out there, because this is a quote from last night, and there's it's trending right now with Dan's press conference and talking about the officials last night. I don't know if you guys saw it, but one of the quotes is, I put this on my social media, is, I don't think there's another program that's won as much as we've won that gets as bad of a whistle. And I don't think that's. I think two things can be true. So, Joe, you're 1,000%. I really try to not leave the show with the officials are terrible and they all suck and we're getting jobbed and all that stuff, right? But what I will say is, it's hard to, and I think Maria could probably attest to this, as a player and as a coach, if your players are trying to give you intensity and they're trying to kind of chest up and try to really kind of play with physicality, and they're being called, and they look up at the scoreboard and there's 9 fouls for Butler and 2 fouls for UConn, it's like that kind of gets taken away. Forget it, there's going to be like 4 or 5 of those fouls where you get lazy and use your hands, but there's probably half of those that are also just shit calls. And yeah. I do think that plays into the effect. Every game, and he said it last night, where's the freedom of movement? I don't see people giving UConn relief with fouls called on screens. You're running sets and you're getting grabbed and you're getting your jersey pulled, and they're not calling any of that. I literally rewatched it, and it happened about 12 times in the Butler game last night. It happened in the island that he doesn't want to talk about. It happened in Maui. Memphis came out and essentially played the Seattle Seahawks defense and said, we're going to try to, remember this back in the Legion of Boom, where they were we're going to hold everybody and try, just call it on us every time, but because we know you won't. And I think that's the book on UConn right now, is we're going to try to be out physical the team, and Danny's going to lose his mind, and that's only going to help. That's only going to help us going forward. And it doesn't help that we don't have Donovan Clingan in the middle to clean up our mess.
Well, I think you're right. You guys are both right on a lot of those points. I actually sat on a hour and a half long referee meeting last week with Deb Williamson, who's phenomenal, and she runs a bunch of different things. But she was talking about the differences in the men's and the women's game, and I think a lot of it was eye opening to me. Like, one of the things in the men's game, right, is like a 2-hand hand check. You're actually allowed to do that in the men's game. It's actually not a foul. Whereas in the women's game, you put, you got to take the hand off, you extend it again for a second time, it's a foul. So I think a lot of that physicality that we're seeing, we're like, oh man, we're getting bumped. We think our fouls, and they probably aren't. I think where UConn is getting into trouble from a foul perspective, in my opinion, they leave their feet too much.
Oh, that's for sure too.
Yeah, they leave their feet way too much. They're out of position. And then when they're leaving their feet, like, what's his name? Reed played great defense in the post one possession last night, all the way until the end. Mm-hmm. And then he swipes his arm down. And he didn't even need to. Like, he's there, right? And then you got Sampson, who's trying to block every shot. So he's constantly leaving his feet, which allows the offensive player to get the body into them while they're out of position. So I think that for them, I agree with maybe some of the physicality around screens and whatnot could be called. But let's be honest, then you'd be calling a foul on both ends every second of the game, and then they'd be complaining that there's no flow. But I think that UConn's main issue on defense is specifically even some of their guards leaving their feet on the perimeter. I haven't seen UConn guards be beat off the dribble this easy in a really long time. Mm-hmm. And then the rim protectors are leaving their feet so much, right? And that's the scouting report. Get Sampson up in the air, right? You're either going to get a foul or you're going to get a cleaner look at the hoop. Or, by the way, now he's jumping to block it. Now he can't get the rebound, so they're getting the offset, the weak side rebound, and they're putting it back, right? So I think that's a lot of UConn's issues right now are not even necessarily the fouls, because I do think Danny has a little bit to do with it, to Joe's point. Like after a while that gets annoying as a ref, right?
Sure.
But I think they just need to tighten up some of those fundamentals around the rim, and leaving their feet and reaching and getting their bodies out of position is definitely something that I see as really, really consistent.
Butler got too many easy shots last night.
Oh, yeah,
that was the
totally.
They got
Exactly.
far too many easy shots last night. And I think on the free throw thing, I think the free throws that UConn has given up is fair, but I also think they should be taking a lot more free throws. I don't think there should be a 100 free throw discrepancy.
I agree.
And I agree with Dan. You know, in a way that if you're a two-time national champion, you would think you would get more calls. But I also think that 1 year differs from another. And you can't. Here's the thing that everybody wants to point to: you got to take Duke out of it, because let's be honest. There's 5 people from Connecticut. We're never going to think Duke never got the benefit, that Duke didn't get a favored treatment. Duke and North Carolina every year played in a regional that was right close to home before that became a point of emphasis for the NCAA. You know, I can tell you chapter verse when I was doing the games of times that we had to go to LA, to Oakland to play UCLA, to Greensboro to play Mississippi State, to North Carolina to play North Carolina, to Texas to play Texas. I mean, it was epic. We never got the benefit that the Duke and North Carolina got, and we're just not. We're even though we're as dominant a program as there's been in the country over the last quarter century, we're just not looked upon that way, and it's unfortunate.
I agree.
But we're just not. You know, this whole blue blood debate is such bullshit. You look over the last 25 years, our blood's as blue as anybody, and not just national flag blue. But we're just not looked at that way. Maybe it's because we're not in a Power 5 conference or a Power 4 conference.
They can't believe it. That's what it is.
I
they
just
can't believe that UConn, who is not in a Power 5 conference,
little old biggie
for all these years has been sustainable in a tiny state. In a tiny state with not has been able to sustain for as long as they have.
Yeah. Hey Maria, let me ask you a question. What did you think of? What have you thought of the last couple of women's games? I mean, I thought, I thought the 3-headed monster was great on Sunday, but again, you got to consider the competition. The thing that concerned me before, when it was Azzy's first game back, was Sarah Strong hardly touched the ball. She had 5 shots in that game, and I got worried that maybe, it's going to become too much the Beckers and Fudd show. And as we've talked about, I don't think there's any question, Sarah Strong's her best player. I think much like Solo, she's got to touch the ball an awful lot.
I agree. Yeah. Five shots. I mean, again, against some of these teams that they're blowing out, I guess it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, I agree with you. That was a little concerning. I think outside of Paige, because obviously Paige is going to get the shots that Paige is going to want to get every game. Sarah's got to be the second shot leader. I just think that's a non-negotiable. I think in order for them to be really good, I mean, because they can't get to a spot where she's now used to taking 5 to 8 shots a game, and they need her to take 15 because Azzy's having an off shooting night, right? So, and she scores in more ways than Azzy does. She can score at the rim. She can square up and get to the rim. She can play back to the basket. She's a 3-level scorer. So to not be able to get her double-digit shots per game is definitely a red flag. I thought they looked good in the last 2 games since we've done this. I mean, obviously Seton Hall, who's one of the better teams in the Big East, but anytime you have one of the best programs in the country making 17 threes,
right?
I mean, beating anybody who's making 17. I mean, they were so lights out. I thought like Gino was going to take a shot from the sideline and it was just going to go in. They actually showed Tony on the head coach of the other team at one point in the fourth quarter. Allie Zeibel made a shot at the end of the shot clock and she caught it and just threw it up and it went in and they showed him and he was like, wow. Like, you know, you're hoping you can contain these guys and they're just making everything that they throw up.
And Gino was smiling too. Gino looked happy for the first time in a while.
It's funny because I talked to Morgan on Friday about something totally separate, and she was actually sick with the stomach bug, and they had the number one recruit there this weekend.
Yep.
So it was a big weekend, and Seton Hall was her scout, so she was all concerned because she might not be able to be there Saturday to go through it. So I texted her after the game, and I said, "Oh, it looks like your scout worked out," and she's like, "It wasn't my scout. We made 17 threes. We couldn't miss." You know, so I think sometimes you just have nights like that and it doesn't matter. But I agree, Joe. I think to your point, I really hope now that AZ's back that Sarah doesn't lose some of that volume she was getting. Now, on the bright side, right, we got to see Aubrey Griffin for the first time this year.
Yeah.
So I thought she looked really good considering,
She did.
you know, she hasn't played in a game in like over a year.
381 days, Mark said.
So, you know, I think that's a real positive for them, you know, to get a couple of these conference games underneath her belt before they have to play Tennessee and South Carolina, because I think they're going to need her to beat both of those teams. I really do.
Right.
Do you think right now, now that everyone's back, you know, I think Caroline Ducharme is, you know, she's still up in the air. They mentioned, you know, that she can make a surprise appearance, Big East tournament. I think Gino joked around about that in a press conference, but we're not expecting that. So with Aubrey back, I would actually love to see some lineup kind of tinkering with Aubrey in there, where Sarah is kind of in the post more, where they could potentially, now that they have Aubrey's athleticism, and kind of spread out the shooting, so to speak, even if you have Morgan Shelley in at the same time, almost like giving Jana a break, kind of having like more of a speed lineup where Sarah's at the 5, Aubrey at the 4, Morgan at the 3, and then AZ and Paige at the 1 and 2. I know people don't really love to see Paige as on the ball as much, but I wouldn't mind seeing it just because it just gives them so much more flexibility. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I like their speed lineup. You know, I think anytime, like, Sarah's so dangerous at either the 3 or the 4. So I think either way you put her, as long as she doesn't have to play that 5, I think that benefits them, right? You know, I just still I think about now, and I think that we'll coast through the Big East and the Big East tournament. I just don't think there's anyone that can touch us or come close. I'm looking more down the road. Like, I had an opportunity to watch UCLA again this weekend. I mean, this Lauren Betts girl in the post. I mean, we're gonna need Jana to play if we run into them, because from a height and a skill perspective, I just think Sarah and Aubrey will just be a little bit undersized with her. I mean, the kid had 9 blocks the other day. She had something like 11 or 12 rebounds, 20 something points, 8 or 9 assists. I mean, it was like wild. So I think
how's the rest of their team, Maria?
Kiki Rice, the point guard, is really, really good. They got a couple of good role players that they're really, really good. And I think like you could tell they're so locked in, you know, because they had a lead, they lost it a little bit, and then like 6 minutes left in the game, they just turned it up, and I think they ended up winning by like 20. So they have the pieces. I think also at South Carolina, we're just going to need a little bit more height and a little bit more physicality in the post. I think Aubrey makes up for some of that with her athleticism, but she's going to need to get her feet wet a little bit in some of these other games. So I like the speed lineup. If we got to speed the game up, I actually like the lineup of like KK at the point, AZ and Paige on the wing, Sarah in the post, and you can throw Aubrey at the 5 if you needed to, or Jana. Like I like that lineup too. I think that Paige at the point is great, but I think when Paige is at the point, she doesn't get as many looks. So I think that's always, you know, you throw that out there. They have Chen that starts now, and it's a little bit of a slower lineup, right, to start, and then KK comes in and speeds up the game. So I do like that second lineup with KK at the point. You know, Paige is a great passer. It's not that she can't play the point, but I do think it takes away from her opportunities to get to her spots and score. So
let me ask you this question. I did a show on this, Joe and Maria, as about the difference with Paige and Sarah. Obviously, the WNBA, you can't go in the draft if you're an underclassman. I said in a hypothetical, because as Joe said, I think Sarah's our best player. Hypothetical right now, you're the number one team, and you could, and the rules are changed, and Sarah's available.
Oh,
I would take Sarah over Paige just from the longevity standpoint, and the fact that she's younger, she has more upside.
Injury standpoint,
three level scorer. Definitely, obviously Paige is transcended, generational. She's gonna sell tickets, so there's that aspect of it. But just from a basketball perspective, I love.
Yeah,
Paige.
it's a tough one. You got a bunch of kids that I think are out there right now that can be in the league right now and be thriving. I think Sarah and Paige definitely being two of them. I think Juju Watkins is definitely another. Hidalgo at Notre Dame is probably another. I mean, you have a lot of these kids that can step in. I think Sarah is only if I'm someone who's taking the number one pick today, and Juju and Paige and Sarah are coming out, I probably go Juju or Paige because I look at it from a financial business perspective, not just basketball. Because I just think that Sarah, because she's playing in the shadows of Paige a little bit right now, doesn't have the notoriety and the marketability that Paige has. If you're going based off of just upside, who can help your team long term and longevity, Sarah or Juju are probably your two choices.
Yep,
I agree. I think you're 1,000% right, Maria. I think eventually, I think Sarah's going to be the better pro. But when you draft number one, obviously you're looking to bring somebody in that's got pizzazz to them, and certainly that's Paige and that's Juju right now. Also, if you're drafting number one or number two, you're not very good. So you need somebody to give you an instant spark to heighten the awareness of your team.
Ticket sales. You got to sell tickets.
Oh yeah,
it's going to be sacrilegious, but in this state, but neither of those players have the national attractiveness that Caitlin
personality.
Clark.
Yeah,
it's going to be different. It's going to be different. But from a basketball standpoint, Maria, do you think Paige, because she's kind of frail, do you think that's going to be a drawback when she gets to the pros?
I think just like any rookie, she's going to struggle in the beginning. Just like I thought Caitlin would. The thing with Caitlin, and she did struggle until All-Star break.
All-Star break.
She had a little bit of a break, and then she turned it on. But I think the difference between Caitlin and
I don't think Caitlin struggled, to be honest.
She did.
No, she did in the beginning. She got knocked around a little bit.
That's just Caitlin hate.
No,
I mean, we really could go through the stats if you want. I mean, it's really not Caitlin hate. Like,
give me a break.
She struggled. She struggled
She got knocked around a little bit.
Listen, work on your internet connection, not on your Caitlin perspective over there. But here's what I'll say is that I think that the difference between Caitlin and Paige is Caitlin's long range ability, right? Her ability to be able to pull from deep and make it, where you don't have to necessarily like Paige's game is mid range, right? So you're getting bumped, you're getting a lot more physicality in the mid range game than you are pulling from 40 feet out. So, Caitlin can score some points and do some stuff without somebody even really bumping her, right? She can just dribble up the court and pull from the timeline and make it. So I think that Paige will struggle with that physicality and the speed of the game. I mean, and we can talk about this on the men's side and the women's side. We've talked about it before with like kind of the cakewalk that the Big East is, but like, look at the men right now. We're talking about the physicality of Butler last night. Yeah. What do you think the physicality is going to be like if they see Tennessee in the NCAA tournament? I mean, you're talking about teams that are used to literally physical contact all the time. And I think we've seen that with Paige the last couple of years in the NCAA tournament. She struggled in some big spots when the physicality has kind of notched up a little bit. So I do think that her frailness / just the style of her game, Joe, I think is is going to give her a little bit of a struggle just because of where she likes to score her points.
Maria, I just wanted to ask you, I had two questions. What did you think of the 3-on-3 league that opened and how they did and the long-term effect of it? Do you think it'll succeed?
Yeah, I think it will succeed. I think they have the right investors. I think that there's such a hoorah around the sport. I think if they can eventually get like Caitlin to participate, it would increase that more. I think she was smart not to do it this year and kind of rest her body after like a full, basically like year and a half of nonstop basketball. So I did think that was smart. I did get a chance to see some clips of Angel Reese. It looks like she's been podcasting more than she's been working on her layups, but we saw a lot of the same from her. I saw her. There was a really funny clip of like she got like 4 rebounds off of her own missed layups and then finally put it back. But no, I think it's great for the game. I think it's a great outlet for the pro game when they're out of season. Obviously, it gives them the ability to not have to go overseas and stay here and make some money. So I think it'll do well. I like that it's not like technically a half court 3-on-3 like you see in the Olympics. So like even though it's because like I don't know about you guys and how much basketball you've played, but like half court 3-on-3 is probably the hardest style of basketball. Like you can't hide, you can't take a second off. It's a lot of wear and tear on the body because there's no transition. So I do like that it's not the half court. It's obviously an abbreviated full court, but it's not as wear and tear on their bodies as a typical 3-on-3 would be. And I think it's kind of fun. It kind of gives you like that vibe of, and they used to do, I know they still do it, but it's not as good now, but like back when they would do like the celebrity games and they would throw like for the NBA, like it kind of gives it a little bit of that vibe, but more competitive. But I think it'll be around for a while. I think that they did a really good job marketing it, setting it up. I think the rules are good. It's not like a boring full.
And it got higher ratings than the WNBA. It got higher ratings than the WNBA.
Let me ask you a question about that, because not even about the ratings, but where it should go. Like I think some of it's being streamed on Max. I did a show about this with one of my contributors, T. Baker, who's a Big East beat reporter, and we were talking about like I think personally, I know it would anger a bunch of people to have to pay for streaming to watch a specific league, but I do think that they should go to an almost all streaming platform because it would create more revenue. Like if you think about like Netflix streaming right now and Netflix doing football games, they get to double dip in advertising. So like the ad revenue is so much more on a streaming channel that they could then you're going to give more money to the company or the sport that you're essentially buying, right? So if Unrivaled is on Netflix or Prime or whatever, the cut of the pie for all the players that have equity in this, including our own Gino Auriemma invested in it, would definitely make a lot of money off of it because maybe they give them $1 billion versus TNT giving you a couple $100 million, something like that, because they can afford it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I would love to see like Amazon Prime or Netflix pick it up. And I use those two as my main example because I think a lot of people have that already, right? And already paying for that. Like, the Hulu live thing. So you could have like the Hulu app, but if you want to watch live TV, you got to pay like an extra $90 or something a month to get Hulu live. So I think that's a little bit over the top, but I do think that people in general, like a lot of people don't even have cable TV anymore, right?
No, cut the cord.
Yeah, like they're streaming through this, or so whether it becomes like, YouTube TV, Amazon, Netflix, a lot of these different things that people already have, I think it would definitely be the smart route. And it's something that people are already used to streaming sports on in general. So I think it would be a huge benefit. I think you're spot on with that. I hope they go that route.
And
I got
that's a flip it to.
I got a fact check. Check.
Not me, hopefully.
No, because you've been Marcel Marceau today.
I behaved.
Games before the All-Star break, Clark averaged 18 points a game. In 14 games afterwards, she averaged 23. So it's not like she was a zero before the all.
No, I don't think anyone said that.
It's
Yeah.
not like it's not like she was zero. And I have to be honest with you, I totally disagree on the Unrivaled. If you put it on streaming now in its inception, I think it goes away quickly. I think
I agree with that. I don't think they should do it now.
They're on TNT, right?
Yeah.
Which is great, which people know from the NHL and the NBA. So I think they're in a good place now, because as we've said, next year when the women go off SNY and go to Peacock, UConn fans are going to lose their shit trying to find those games.
They are
already losing their shit because you can't.
I'll be happy.
You can only get it if you have basic cable right now.
Yeah,
Right.
you can't even watch it on the app. You're right.
Yeah.
Maria, I also wanted to ask you, because you mentioned we talked yesterday, the NIL ruling that Biden had passed before he left. Could you talk a little bit about that and what he suggested and passed before he left office?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. He basically came out and passed the Title IX that, so in other words, if you have a quarterback at UConn making, $1 million, or let's just say the football team gets $1 million,
Right.
well, then a female team has to get $1 million, right? So you could have a rower at UConn who now is going to absorb NIL money to satisfy this Title IX stuff. It's kind of, I was just that's why I was late. I was actually in a staff meeting, and the state of Connecticut, the Department of Education just came out Friday, because every state is different in how they view NIL and how it's dished out. But the Department of Education just came out with the Title IX Part 2. So, and not only that, but they're mandating the universities to track it. So, which is now going to create like a whole other issue. So if you take a school like me, like I already have stuff where I'm like, all right, I'm going to go out and try to create, if I can get $100,000 in NIL money that I can offer to student athletes to come here, that's a huge value add, right? At the D3 level. Even if we split it up between 10 kids, they're still getting $10,000. That's a lot of money. But if I do that, that means that men's basketball has to get $100,000. Either that or I got to split that $100,000 with basketball.
Jesus. Wow.
So it's a distribution evenly between men and women. So across all the sports, so the UConn Foundation has $22 million that's coming in. They would have to distribute that 100% equally. So, like if you're using football as an example, there's a lot less money because there's so many players, and there's a lot less money on the women's side that would go, like Maria said, to some of those
like Olympic sports.
Yeah, different sports. Let's say.
I think it's unsustainable. I think it's unsustainable that way.
Yeah,
absolutely unsustainable.
With no disrespect, every sport is not created equal.
They're not written on revenue. Yeah.
The other question I thought too, before you go into that, was outside money. So a lot of that was because of TV revenue, and everybody was getting X amount of dollars internally to be able to distribute. Right. My question, and I'm not 100% sure on this, is the outside money. So Maria runs a collective, gets $100,000 to distribute to her players from the outside. If she runs that as a for-profit that she decides to put out to her own players, does that have to get distributed evenly? And how would they even police that? Because she's an outside company and she can do whatever she wants with that money.
Whatever she wanted, right?
If she's not, yeah.
So the problem with that is, because that came up in our meeting today, is so you would have to hire an outside company that is completely disconnected from the university, and then they can distribute that. Like one of the things came up is like our football team, right? There's an alum that owns a car dealership. Well, he gives any football player that wants to go buy a car, he gives them a 2% note, right? When, I don't know, maybe the note would normally be 8%. So you're getting a 6% discount on the note for any football player. Well, we can't control or police that. That's impossible. Now, the Department of Education is saying, you don't have to control it, but now you have to record it and report it. So once you're asking people to record and report, right, you're opening up a whole other can of worms, because now they're going to come back and, we get into this, probably my least favorite acronym in a lot of different ways is this DEI thing, right? Is that, how are we going to do this equitably and include everybody throughout the whole campus in that 2% note? Now,
Right.
If you're a car dealership owner, you don't want 600 kids every year coming in and getting a 2% note. Like,
No.
it'd be impossible to sustain your own business. So what does that in turn do? Well, then he's just not going to give it to anybody.
And
So
because state by state, there's a problem too. State by state, you got an issue.
Right. Correct, because every state is different. So I'm only talking about the state of Connecticut.
Yeah, recruiting, it could become an issue for basketball and football specifically. I mean, that's the biggest things we're talking about here, because of the fact that if this state decides, okay, outside monies, are not going to be policed, and then Connecticut says no, if outside companies are contributing to a player, that has to be met. So state by state, that could be a huge issue. Eventually becomes it's definitely unsustainable, but it's going to be an issue recruiting wise, because if I could choose a school to go to and I know that, I don't know, it's not going to be policed in Florida, let's say, and then in Connecticut, I'm going to get a lot less, because if my money goes here, it's going to be matched, and that means the guy or girl or company
get less.
Let me ask a question, Maria. If I'm hearing you right, so this was something that was this an executive order that Biden signed before he left office? Is that
it was an executive order.
So forgive my naivete, even though I was a political science major, I didn't really pay attention in class. Can now that Trump in his second term,
can he overturn it?
He can overturn.
Well, then I think it's a moot point, because he will. Because if there's one thing that this guy loves to do, is he's going to overturn.
He will, but listen, I'd like to think that there's a bunch of other things on his docket right now before getting to NIL. But but yes, I think it'll be overturned. But point of the matter is, right, is it's just it then creates
it's just complicated everything,
because now
if he wants to be a hero, he'll handle that one quickly.
You know what's going to happen is someone in SEC country is going to get wind of it and just knock on his door, and then he's going to make a big deal about it.
It's probably already on his radar, but
sure.
Again, I think that we're still talking about it. There's still two different issues here, right? Because that's think about federal versus state, right?
Sure.
So if your state is saying that you have to
enforce it,
that doesn't really matter, right? So he can come out and overturn it and whatever. But if the state of Connecticut says, okay, that's fine, but here's how we're going to do it here, it still affects the state of Connecticut, right?
The state thing, Shu, that you talked about, it's no different than in the pros, where pros go to places, and a lot of times where the state income tax isn't as
right.
Agree.
Right? It's the exact same thing. And I when I listen to games when I'm in the car, when I listen to our basketball games with Mike and Wayno, there's a car thing for Aiden Mahaney. There's Alex is on the golf law firm that. Caroline has a thing for Rosenberg Orthodontics. Not every play, the thing people have to remember about this, and I said this when the whole NIL thing started, not every player is going to make money off this.
No,
and that's just kind of the fact of life. Not every player is gonna get a deal. The D3 volleyball player is not going to get the same deal that the D1 football player is going to get.
No, Joe, I just wanted to ask you, because the women are playing, and I said women, they're playing two difficult out-of-conference games against Tennessee and South Carolina. How come the men's team isn't playing any out-of-conference games this late in the season? I was just curious.
That's the way men's basketball works.
That's just how they schedule it.
And the reason, and I guarantee you, if you looked at 99% of the other conference major women's teams, they're not playing it either. And do you know why, Steve? Do you want to take a guess?
Money?
No, had nothing to do with money, Slappy. Sit down. Put your head down.
Oh, okay.
The reason is UConn has to keep sharp because the Big East sucks so bad.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense then. That makes sense because the conference is so poor.
Gino spaces out his non-conference games. The men play them all in the beginning to get ready for the Big East.
There's one anomaly this year. Duke is playing Illinois in the men's side.
Right.
And I think, but sometimes that's scheduled, years in advance. So that's part of it. But Gino has done this forever.
Yeah, he's done it forever. Done it forever. They always play Tennessee. They always play Tennessee once the conference season has begun, and they've always played South Carolina for it. So I think it's Gino's way of keeping his team, reminding his team what games against good teams in the tournament will look like, as opposed to just going through the Big East like Schuman going through Georgia.
Right. So
one thing before you dive too much in this, Maria, I'm curious on this with the NIL. Let's say
if you look at your two schedules, right? Like I'm looking at them now. The
Hello. Oh, well, I'm curious on NIL. If Page, let's say that happened, Page sued the state, it would go up to the Supreme Court. Wouldn't it, like if they turned it down, that would be a case that would then federally continue to move up, right? Because it would get appealed, and then probably would eventually to Mark's point there, eventually it's going to go all the way up the chain, and is going to get mandated that that's not going to be the case, because that would be the first thing I would do if I was Paige Peckers, who's obviously probably the person in Connecticut that has the most to lose, right? If that was this year, for example, you would immediately sue because you're losing millions and millions of dollars potentially, and you'd immediately sue and go right up the chain, from that standpoint, because you'd appeal even if the federal judge says, the state judge says, that it has to be distributed evenly. She just continues to appeal all the way to federal court. That case would go right to the Supreme Court, and we get immediately overruled because it's obviously a conservative.
Well, they always win. Yeah.
Well, all of this stuff will stay in place until there's a lawsuit, right? Like this meeting that I was in this morning. Here's an interesting one for you guys: is that they're working on it now. They've already had conversations. I don't know if it'll be passed by next year, but probably the following year. They're changing it to 5 years. So
that's 100% happening.
For 5 years, right? Now they'll get away from. I don't think they say they'll get away from the medical red shirt, which I don't think they can, because the second that a kid gets hurt for 2 seasons, they'll sue and they'll get rid of that, and then that will change, right? But basically, what they're going to say now is a kid will have 5 years to play 5 years, where before it was you had 5 years to play 4.
Wow.
Right? But with COVID and everything that's changed, they're now going to go to you have 5 years to play 5 seasons. So now
you have 7 for 5.
you could, right? Or 6 or whatever. Because I think, one will kind of get swallowed up in the 5. But if let's just say you had 2 season ending injuries, right? One of those you could probably appeal and have 6 years to play 5 seasons, which, again, on the men's side, I don't really know that helps them at all, because you have so many kids that are leaving early for the pros. But on the women's side, I think that's a big deal, because you have these kids that are making a ton of money on NIL in college. Like, why would you not just stay your 5th year play?
Hey, to get back to this Biden thing, I'm reading a newspaper. I'm reading an article in something called Inside Higher Ed, and there's already people talking, like Ted Cruz, who I don't look at as a beacon of sports information, but is the Secretary of State, said that he predicted it would be scrapped immediately. And his quote is, "This is a great idea if Biden's intent is to kill both men's and women's college sports." Mandating so-called equal pay when not all sports generate equal revenue will force some colleges out of athletics altogether.
It would. You're right.
Paid like Michael Jordan, but that's not the way it works.
Spot on.
So that's from a high-ranking Republican official. I don't think this thing. Even though, as Maria says, there probably should be a little bit more on the president's plate, that this will be something that will.
But you know what? It's probably something easy enough to just say, "This is dumb. I'm going to scratch it."
Right.
And
exactly.
I'm going to double back to a fact check on Steve for a second. So just so you know, right? And Joe, I think, touched upon it. So if you look at the men's and women's basketball schedules, they're playing the same out of conference games. and they're
Right.
playing about the same amount of out of conference ranked games. But to his point, Gino
They're
usually
scheduled
always
differently.
puts two
I got you.
after the new year, and we've been doing that for years. So it's
Right.
not a matter of why aren't we scheduling those. It's just a matter of when we're scheduling.
When they play them. I got
Exactly.
you, because they played Texas and Baylor.
Which
I got you.
I like Gino's way better because, you know, in the
I do
beginning of the
too.
season, both teams are trying to figure it out, right? They're going to be totally different teams in January than they were in November or specifically in February. Why not schedule a couple of tune-ups before you hit the Big East tournament and the NCAA to
Right.
see where you stand and where your progress is? So I like the way the women do it better, but 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
So, Joe, I will ask you,
Yes.
what do you see for the next 3 games with Xavier, DePaul, and then Marquette, who you said is another good team? How do you see those playing out for UConn?
Xavier played UConn pretty tough. That's an
Yeah, they did.
here. On the road, if you don't have McNeely, I think will be a battle. I think DePaul will be a walkthrough.
Yes.
And I think Marquette will be extremely. I think they've got 2
They're
potentially
fierce.
really hard games out of the next 3. And again, it's all dependent as to when McNeely comes back. He was hopping around pretty well on the bench last night. So
He
I
sprinted
don't
to the
think
locker room. So
yeah, I don't think he's going to be out for long. I think he'll be back sooner rather than later, which will make them just as Mark said and Maria said, just that much tougher. But again, you know what? Here's my thing: if you go 2-1 in this stretch, it's not the worst thing. It's not the you don't want to go 1-2. You don't want to lose at Xavier and lose to Marquette and beat DePaul.
Right.
Because again, what that's going to do is it's going to move you down in the net rankings. It's going to move, and again, all these bracketologists are like weather people. They're just throwing shit up against the wall. It's just you know. So I would think they'll go 2-1. I think they'll lose one of those games, and I think they'll win the other 2.
Mark, what do you think on the next 3 games?
Well, if don't ever take betting advice from me, so we won't talk about the spreads of any of these games. But what I will say is I think Joe is right. I think is there a possibility where they could win these 3 for sure, but all these games are going to be tough. And to your point, Joe, guess what happened in the net rankings last night with the win over Butler? They went down because when you play shitty teams or mediocre teams that have their analytics are bad. Butler, let's face it, Butler's lost a ton of close games. They have a win over Mississippi State. Thad Matta's a good coach. This team is just battling, but they're just not closing anybody out. So they're 8-11 or whatever they are, or 7-11. And so it's not surprising that the game was close, but a better UConn team should win this game by 15, 17, 18 points. And then their net ranking and their Ken Pom and all of that stuff goes up. But when you beat a mediocre team that's 90th in the net by 2 points in overtime, you drop. I think they went from 32nd to 36th in the net.
Jeez.
You can maybe check that, Joe, if you're doing fact checking. But that's a problem in itself. So like when you play the DePauls of the world, if you don't win that by more than 10 points, your kind of net goes down. So even if they win not all 3, if they win these next 2 games close, they could stay right where they are. The big one is Marquette. If they have Liam back, if they can get a quad 1 win over Marquette, who's ranked top 10 right now in all of the predictive metrics, that would really help them. Probably move them up to the 5 or the 4 line, and then sky's the limit after that.
Maria,
Marquette's 17th in the net ranking. So again, I totally agree with that. And as you said, UConn 34th, and you know you get it's kind of like what it is in hockey with the pairwise rankings, where our hockey team is having a great year. When you play a Quinnipiac like they will on Friday at CT Ice, win, lose, or draw, their ranking will probably go up. But then when they play Sacred Heart or Yale on Saturday, ranking will go down, pairwise will go down. So it's the exact same thing with the net ranking as far as basketball.
Yeah, I never thought I'd ever be covering. First, I never thought I'd be covering UConn as a job. So that's the first kind of cool thing. But I never thought I'd be covering a UConn team that when they play a Big East game, they could lose ground. So that just goes to show you how bad the Big East this year is from both the men's and the women's. But yet the play itself seems like it's as tough as it ever has been, just because kind of we're in that mediocre level right now where we don't have our best player and all that. Quick story. I was when I first started doing some of this stuff as kind of like a side gig, I was covering the Southern Conference because I'm down in Greensboro, and this is when Wes Miller was at UNCG before he went to Cincinnati. And they had the SoCon had a great year. They had Wofford went undefeated. They almost beat Kentucky in the second round. UNCG was the last team out. I think they got a second, almost got another team in. Furman beat Villanova that year. So it was a really good conference to cover. And all the same teams all the same coaches are now at high major jobs. But it was so interesting to kind of look at that from a perspective of a mid-major where even when you have opportunities and you lose close games, you don't get the respect of, until you actually do it. So like Furman got a ton of respect that year because they beat Villanova. But, I remember UNCG beat a bad Georgetown that year. ETSU played a tough game against Kansas. So like it's a good level of play, but you can tell, now why that these games matter. Like if you have to win them, you can't just get close. And in UConn's case, you can't just win these games by a slim margin. You do have to kind of ramp it up. You got to
have the style points. Maria, what do you think about the next 3 games for the UConn men with Xavier, DePaul, and Marquette?
Yeah, I think Marquette's going to be really tough. I think that's going to be the toughest of the 3. I think we beat, I think we win the other 2. And I hope McNeely. I mean, listen, if McNeely's back, I think we can win all 3.
Right.
I think Marquette is a tough beat without McNeely, in my opinion. Doesn't mean we can't do it, but I think it poses some problems for us both on the offense and defensive end for sure.
And then with the women, do you think they exact their revenge against Villanova and then Creighton and DePaul?
What do you mean their revenge?
What revenge?
Oh, it was the men that lost to Villanova. I'm sorry.
Fact check them, Joe.
Is this 2 or 3? Is that 2?
That's 2.
I watched the Villanova game. I remember that too.
Villanova were playing at home. We're at Gamble, and if anybody's going, what I hear is it's $2 Miller Lite night.
Yeah.
So if you're a Miller Lite drinker, it's $2.
You'll be there.
So there'll be a lot of students, I'm sure, a little saucy at the game. No, I think the toughest of the 3 is going to be at Creighton. But I think we still win that handily. I mean, Creighton's tough only because they can get hot from the perimeter. But no, I think we beat all 3 pretty handily.
Yeah. Dave,
hey, Steve.
I'm
gonna jump, buddy. I really appreciate having me on. I have to.
I got to jump too.
Sorry. No, we're gonna end. So for Mark Zanetto from the Locked On podcast, Locked On UConn.
Yep.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. You offered incredible insight and analysis. Thank you for joining us.
Mark, you're great, man. Anytime I can hop on with you, let me know.
Would love to have you, Maria. Same thing. I do men's and women's. So
let me know anytime.
Yeah, let us know.
Yep.
Joe D, the voice of the Huskies, the icon, the best of the best. We appreciate you as well. Maria Conlin, UConn women's basketball legend and current Western Connecticut State University Wolves head basketball coach, and the coach, David Schuman himself. This has been Husky Hoops. I'm Steve Cully, sometimes the best podcast host in the universe. And when life gives you lemons, don't make lemonade. Take 2 oranges and throw them back at Dave.